Susan Miller floated near the viewport of the small shuttle, her eyes fixed on the massive orbital scrapyard spread out before her. Pieces of broken ships drifted slowly in their designated zones, held in place by weak containment fields. The sight would have depressed most captains, but Susan felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. "There has to be something useful out there," she said. Joe Clark, her executive officer, didn't share her optimism. He crossed his arms and frowned at the field of junk. "The United Earth Navy sent us here as a joke, Captain. They don't expect us to find anything worth salvaging." Susan pushed away from the viewport and turned to face him. 3 years ago, the Exaraxians destroyed half our fleet. We lost good ships and good people, including my last command. Her voice grew quiet at the end, but she quickly regained her composure. "The Navy won't give us a new ship, so we'll make our own." Joe sighed. "From scraps. From whatever we can find," Susan replied. She pointed to a large structure floating at the edge of the yard. "What's that?" The shuttle pilot, a young woman named Olivia Reeves, checked her scanner. "That's the old Griffin, ma'am. Pre-war cargo hauler. Hit by an asteroid about 15 years ago. They salvaged the valuable parts and left the rest." Susan studied the broken vessel. Half its hull was missing, torn away in the accident. The remaining structure was dull gray, with patches of rust visible even from a distance. But the main frame was intact, and that was what mattered. "Take us closer," she ordered. The shuttle moved slowly through the debris field. As they approached the Griffin, Susan's excitement grew. The cargo hauler was bigger than she had first thought. Its remaining hull could easily hold a crew of 50, with room for systems and weapons. "Look there," she said, pointing to another piece of debris drifting nearby. "Is that a weapons platform?" Joe leaned forward to look. Defense Platform D-17. Decommissioned when the Mark IV system replaced it. He glanced at Susan and saw the look in her eyes. "Captain, you can't be serious. That's 20-year-old technology. Does it still work?" Olivia checked her scanner again. "Power core is dead, but the rail guns might be salvageable." Susan's smile widened. "Circle the area. I want to see everything." For the next hour, they drifted through the scrapyard, cataloging potentially useful pieces. They found engine parts from 3 different types of ships, a mostly intact sensor array, and even an old shuttle bay door that could be repurposed as hull plating. When they finally returned to the Griffin, Susan had made up her mind. "This is it. This will be our ship." Joe looked skeptical. "Captain, with all respect, this isn't a ship. It's a collection of parts that don't go together. Some of them are from different technological eras. Others were built by different species. Then we'll make them go together," Susan insisted. She turned to Olivia. "Contact Chief Engineer Frank Dawson. Tell him I found our new command and I need him here as soon as possible." Joe shook his head. "The Admiral will never approve this." "The Admiral told us we could have anything in the scrapyard," Susan reminded him with a sly smile. "He didn't say it had to be one complete thing." As their shuttle docked with the broken hull of the Griffin, Susan felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since losing her previous ship. The Navy might have sent them here as a punishment or a joke, but she would turn it into an opportunity. "It won't be pretty," she admitted as they floated through a breach into what had once been the cargo hauler's main hold. Loose wires hung from broken walls, and the floor was littered with debris from the original accident. "But it will fly," Susan continued, "and it will fight. And the Exaraxians will never see it coming." Joe looked around the ruined space and finally smiled. "I think you're right about that, Captain. Nobody would expect this." Susan placed her hand on the cold metal wall. "Send the word out. Tell every engineer, mechanic, and tech specialist who's willing to bend the rules that Captain Susan Miller is building a warship out of junk, and we're going to make it the most dangerous piece of junk in the galaxy." 2 weeks later, the old cargo ship Griffin no longer looked abandoned. Small work shuttles buzzed around it like bees. Teams in spacesuits crawled across its surface, welding new plates onto the broken hull. Inside, the empty spaces were slowly filling with salvaged equipment. Frank Dawson stood in what would become the engine room, staring at a holographic display of the ship's systems. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold. He had been working for 16 hours straight, trying to solve an impossible problem. "It won't work," he muttered to himself. These systems were never meant to connect to each other. The door slid open, and Susan walked in. "How's it going, Frank?" Frank gestured at the hologram. "Not good, Captain. We have an Arcturan fusion reactor designed for a luxury cruise ship. We have power conduits from 3 different Earth vessels, and we have Soraxian capacitors that we salvaged from that abandoned warship. Can you make them work together?" Susan asked. Frank rubbed his tired eyes. "In theory, maybe, but it's never been done before. The Arcturan technology uses a completely different power signature than our systems, and the Soraxian parts." He shook his head. "We barely understand how they work at all." Lisa Howard entered the room, carrying a strange-looking device. Lisa was their xenotech specialist, an expert in alien technology. "I think I found a solution for the reactor problem," she said. She placed the device on a table. It looked like a metal cube with glowing blue lines running through it. "This is a Soraxian power converter. It's designed to adapt their technology to different power sources." Frank looked skeptical. "Where did you find it?" "In that pile of junk from the research station," Lisa explained. "Someone was studying it before the war. I think I can reprogram it to convert the Arcturan power signature into something our systems can use." Susan smiled. "See, Frank, solutions are showing up." Frank wasn't convinced. "Even if that works, we still have the navigation problem. The quantum nav array we salvaged is communicating with our computers in what I can only describe as interpretive dance. Half the time, it gives us coordinates that don't exist." "What about the weapons systems?" Susan asked. "Don't get me started," Frank groaned. "We have rail guns that need more power than we can generate. We have missile launchers with no missiles. And we have some kind of alien beam weapon that no one can figure out how to turn on." Susan looked at the holographic display. It showed their creation in its current state, a misshapen hull with pieces sticking out at odd angles. No naval architect would ever approve such a design. It violated every principle of shipbuilding. It was ugly. "And yet, it has potential," Susan said. Frank laughed without humor. "Potential for what? To fall apart the first time we try to move it." "No," Susan said firmly. "Potential to be something new, something unexpected." She walked around the hologram, studying it from all angles. "The Soraxians won't see it coming because nothing like this has ever existed before." Lisa nodded in agreement. "That's true. Their tactical systems are designed to recognize standard chip configurations. This," she gestured at the hologram, "this would confuse them." Frank was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. "I'll need at least 3 more months to make it space-worthy. And even then, I can't promise it will work properly." "You have 2 months," Susan said. "The Navy wants progress, or they'll shut us down." "That's impossible," Frank protested. Susan placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, but we're going to do it anyway." She looked at the hologram again. "What should we call her?" Lisa studied the strange collection of mismatched parts. "How about patchwork? Because that's what she is, pieces stitched together." "UES Patchwork," Susan said, testing the name. "I like it." Frank shook his head, but there was a small smile on his face now. "UES Patchwork, the ugliest ship in the galaxy." "Maybe," Susan agreed. "But soon, she'll also be the most surprising." As if in response, the lights in the room flickered. The Arcturan reactor was powering up for another test. This time, the lights stabilized instead of going out. Frank's eyes widened. That's never happened before. Susan smiled. "See, she wants to live." Susan stood at attention in Admiral William Peterson's office. The large window behind his desk showed Earth in the distance, a blue-green jewel against the darkness of space. The Admiral looked angry as he watched a video of the patchwork on his screen. "This is what you've been doing with Navy resources for the past 3 months?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Susan replied. "The UES patchwork is nearly ready for her first test flight." Admiral Peterson turned the screen so Susan could see it. The video showed the patchwork in its docking bay. Even Susan had to admit it looked strange. The ship had an uneven shape, with parts sticking out at odd angles. Cables ran along the outside of the hull in some places. Different sections were different colors, depending on where the metal had come from. "This isn't a warship," Peterson said. "It's a pile of junk held together with hope and tape." "It may look unusual, sir, but it works," Susan said. "Chief Engineer Dawson has violated every safety regulation in the book," Peterson finished for her. "Those exposed power conduits along the starboard side are protected by salvaged Soraxian armor plating," Susan explained. "Stronger than anything we currently make." The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "Captain Miller, I understand your desire to get back into space. After what happened to your last command, no one would blame you. But this ship makes a mockery of the United Earth Navy." Susan felt her patience wearing thin. "Sir, with respect, we're at war. The Exoraxians have destroyed half our fleet. They're attacking our colonies. Can we really afford to turn away a combat-ready vessel because it's ugly?" "Combat-ready?" Peterson raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to believe that this patchwork can stand up to a Soraxian warship?" "We've installed 4 salvage railguns," Susan said. "The Arcturan power core gives us more speed than a standard patrol vessel. And the quantum navigation system, once we figured out how to communicate with it, gives us jump capabilities that might surprise even the Soraxians." Admiral Peterson studied her face, looking for signs of doubt. He found none. "Captain Miller, I've known you for 10 years. You're one of the best officers in the fleet. But this project," he sighed, "I can't authorize this ship for combat duty." Susan's heart sank. After all their work, after all the problems they had solved, it would end here, in this office. "However," Peterson continued, "I can authorize it for patrol duty in the Outer Rim, far from the main fleet, where it won't be seen by important visitors or allies." Susan kept her face neutral, but inside she was smiling. The Outer Rim was where they needed to be. It was where the Soraxians were attacking isolated colonies. It was where they could make a difference. "Thank you, sir," she said. "When can we depart?" "As soon as your ship passes a basic safety inspection," Peterson said. "But I warn you, Miller, one problem, one malfunction that puts your crew at risk, and I'll have that ship broken down for parts faster than you can say, 'I told you so.'" "Understood, sir." Susan left the Admiral's office and headed for the docking bay where the patchwork waited. Joe Clark met her at the entrance. "How did it go?" he asked. "We're assigned to patrol the Outer Rim," Susan said with a smile. Joe looked surprised. "That's good news. It's exactly what we wanted," Susan said. "The Outer Rim is where the Soraxians are focusing their attacks." "So the Admiral approved the ship?" Joe asked as they walked toward the patchwork. "He thinks he's punishing us by sending us to the edge of human space," Susan explained. "He called our ship ugly." Joe looked up at the strange vessel. "He's not wrong." Susan laughed. "No, he's not. But soon, the Exoraxians will learn to fear this ugly ship." They boarded through a side airlock. Inside, the crew was busy preparing for departure. The corridors were a mix of different designs, with panels from various ships covering the walls. But everything was clean and organized. Frank met them on the bridge, which had been pieced together from 3 different command centers. "We passed the safety inspection," he said proudly. "Barely, but we passed." "Then it's time," Susan said, taking her place in the captain's chair. It had come from a luxury yacht and was more comfortable than standard Navy issue. "Prepare for departure. Set course for the Outer Rim." As the engines powered up, Susan felt the ship come alive beneath her. The patchwork might be ugly, it might be made of cast-offs and junk, but it was hers, and she was going to show the galaxy what humanity could do with the things others threw away. 1 month after leaving Earth, the patchwork drifted silently at the edge of the Mintaka system. The ship's unusual shape and mix of materials made it difficult for standard scanners to detect. Susan had discovered this advantage by accident when a friendly patrol ship failed to notice them during a routine flyby. "Captain, I'm picking up an unknown vessel approaching the mining colony on Mintaka 3, said Kathy Bennett from the navigation console. Susan leaned forward in her chair. "Put it on screen." The main display showed a sleek, dark ship moving toward the small human colony. It had the distinctive angular shape of a Mintakan vessel, but without any identification markings. "Pirates," Joe said quietly. Susan nodded. The outer rim was filled with pirates who attacked isolated colonies, stealing supplies and sometimes people. Weapons status. Dan Collins, the weapons officer, checked his console. Rail guns charged and ready. The modified phase cannon is online, but Frank says it's untested. Shields. The salvaged shield generators are at 80%, Dan replied. Frank says that's as good as they'll get. Susan made her decision. Move to intercept. Keep our power signature low. Let's surprise them. The patchwork glided forward, its mismatched engines running nearly silent. On the bridge, the crew watched as they closed in on the pirate vessel. "They haven't spotted us," Kathy said with surprise. Susan smiled. "Their scanners are probably looking for a standard Navy signature. We don't look like anything they've seen before." When they were within range, Susan gave the order. "Hail them." The pirate ship immediately changed course, turning to face this unexpected threat. Their response came quickly. "This is Captain Vex of the Mintakan Free Trader. This is none of your business, human." "This is Captain Susan Miller of the UES Patchwork," Susan replied. "You are approaching a human colony with weapons charge." "That makes it my business." The pirate captain laughed when he saw the patchwork on his screen. "That's not a warship, it's garbage." "Last warning," Susan said calmly. "Leave this system, or we will fire." "You first," Captain Vex replied. His ship fired a bright energy beam that struck the patchwork's shields. The bridge shook, but the shields held. "Return fire," Susan ordered. "Let's see what our jump can do." Dan targeted the modified phase cannon. It was a strange weapon, built by combining an Arcturan focusing crystal with human amplifiers. No one was quite sure how powerful it would be. The answer came seconds later. A beam of blue-white energy shot from the patchwork and hit the pirate ship. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Mintakan ship's shields collapsed completely, and its engines went dark. "Direct hit," Dan reported, sounding surprised. "Their shields are down, and they've lost power." Lisa Howard checked her readings from the science station. The phase cannon worked better than expected. It created some kind of energy disruption we've never seen before. "They're dead in space, Captain," Joe said. On the screen, the pirate ship drifted helplessly. Captain Vex's voice came through, less confident now. "What did you do to us? What kind of weapon was that?" Susan leaned back in her chair, trying not to show her surprise. "That's classified," she replied. "Now about you leaving this system." "We can't leave without power," Vex protested. "Then I suggest you surrender," Susan said. "We'll tow you to the colony. The authorities there can decide what to do with you." After the pirates were handed over to the colonial security forces, the crew of the Patchwork gathered on the bridge. "How did the phase cannon do that?" Susan asked Lisa and Frank. Frank shook his head in wonder. The combination of Arcturan crystal and human technology created an energy signature that Mintakan shields weren't designed to handle. Their systems didn't recognize it as a weapon until it was too late. "Could Soraxian shields block it?" Susan asked. Lisa thought for a moment. "Maybe not. Soraxian shield technology is similar to Mintakan. They might be vulnerable to the same kind of attack." Susan looked at the main screen, where the stars of the outer rim shone brightly. So our strange ship with its strange weapons might actually have an advantage against the Xaraxians. It's possible, Frank admitted. Because we built it from so many different parts, the patchwork doesn't follow any standard design. Its weapons don't create standard energy signatures. Its engines don't leave standard traces. Susan smiled. Then let's keep patrolling the outer rim. Let's find more pirates. And maybe, when we're ready, we'll find some Xaraxians too. Joe looked concerned. The patchwork against a Xaraxian warship, that would be suicide. Maybe, Susan said. Or maybe it would be the last thing they expect. News of the patchwork's victory over the Mintakan pirates spread quickly through the outer rim colonies. 2 months later, the strange ship had defeated 3 more pirate vessels and helped defend a small mining outpost from raiders. Each time, their unusual weapons worked in ways that surprised even the crew. Admiral Peterson looked at the reports on his desk with disbelief. The patchwork, the ship he had called a mockery, was becoming something of a legend in the outer rim. He turned to his aide, Commander Beth Mason. "How are they doing this?" he asked. "The patchwork shouldn't be able to stand up to a well-armed pirate ship, let alone multiple attackers." Beth consulted her tablet. "Intelligence suggests that the patchwork has developed a reputation, sir. The outer rim species have started calling it the Scraffeep or the Ghost Ship. They believe it has special powers because its design doesn't match any known vessel." Peterson frowned. "That's ridiculous." "Perhaps," Beth agreed. "But there's more. Our analysts have been studying the combat reports. The patchwork's weapons create energy signatures that don't match any known pattern. Enemy shields have trouble recognizing and blocking them." The Admiral was silent for a moment. "And what about these reports of the patchwork appearing in multiple locations at the same time?" "Captain Miller refuses to explain that, sir. She only says that the quantum navigation system they salvaged has interesting properties when connected to their power network." Peterson leaned back in his chair. "So we have an ugly ship that scares pirates, breaks the laws of physics, and is commanded by a captain who thinks rules are just suggestions. That sums it up, sir." Peterson made a decision. "Draft orders for the patchwork to return to Earth. I want to see this miracle ship myself." Meanwhile, in a distant part of the outer rim, the patchwork was in trouble. Susan watched the main screen with growing concern as 3 Xaraxian scout ships surrounded them. "They came out of nowhere," Kathy said from her station. "The quantum nav system didn't detect them until they were right on top of us." "Shields up," Susan ordered. "Charge all weapons." The Xaraxian ships were small but fast. They circled the patchwork, scanning it thoroughly. "They're confused," Lisa reported. "Their scans can't make sense of our design." One of the Xaraxian ships fired a warning shot that passed close to the patchwork's bow. "They're hailing us," Joe said. Susan nodded. On screen, a Xaraxian commander appeared on the display. The alien had blue-gray skin and large, dark eyes. "Human vessel," it said in a harsh voice. "Your ship design violates all known regulations. Explain yourself." Susan smiled slightly. "This is Captain Susan Miller of the UES Patchwork. We're on a routine patrol mission." "Your ship is an abomination," the Xaraxian said. "Its very existence offends us." "I'm sorry to hear that," Susan replied calmly. "But we have every right to be here." The Xaraxian's eyes narrowed. "You will surrender your vessel for inspection and dismantling." Susan's smile faded. "That won't be happening." "Then you will be destroyed." The communication ended. Joe looked worried. "Captain, we can't fight 3 Xaraxian ships at once." "We don't have to fight all of them," Susan said. "Frank, is the new system ready?" Frank nodded from his engineering station. "Ready, but untested. I call it the garbage disposal. It uses the graviton impellers we salvaged last month, combined with the magnetic containment fields from that science vessel." "What does it do?" Joe asked. "In theory," Frank explained, "it creates a localized gravity well that can pull a ship off course. Target the lead Phyrexian vessel, Susan ordered. Dan activated the new weapon system. The patchwork shuddered as energy flowed through systems that were never designed to work together. On the screen, something remarkable happened. A dark distortion appeared in space next to the lead Phyrexian ship. The small vessel was suddenly pulled sideways, spinning out of control as it was caught in the artificial gravity well. "It works," Frank shouted. The other two Phyrexian ships hesitated, clearly confused by what they were seeing. "Target the phase cannon on the second ship," Susan ordered. "Full power." The modified weapon fired, its blue-white beam striking the Phyrexian vessel. Just like with the pirates, the effect was immediate. The alien ship's shields failed, and its engines cut out. The third Phyrexian ship turned and fled. Susan watched it go, then turned to her crew. "Send a message to Earth. Tell Admiral Peterson we've just had our first encounter with Phyrexian forces, and we won." The patchwork never received Admiral Peterson's order to return to Earth. 2 weeks after their encounter with the Phyrexian scouts, something much worse happened. The Phyrexians launched a massive attack on the Outer Rim colonies. Dozens of human outposts went silent in the first day of the assault. Susan and her crew were near Colony Delta when they received the emergency signal. "All ships in range. This is Colony Delta. We are under attack. 5 Phyrexian dreadnoughts have entered orbit. Our defenses cannot hold. Please help." Susan didn't hesitate. "Set course for Colony Delta. Maximum speed." Joe looked concerned. "Captain, 5 dreadnoughts. Even with our unusual weapons, we can't fight that many." "We have to try," Susan said firmly. "There are 10,000 civilians on that colony." Frank spoke up from his engineering station. "I've been working on something that might help. The quantum navigation system has been showing strange readings lately. I think it can do more than just plot courses." "What do you mean?" Susan asked. "I think it can bend space," Frank explained. "Create a sort of shortcut. With the right power input, we might be able to jump directly to Colony Delta without using normal space lanes." "That's impossible," Joe said. "In-system jumps are too dangerous. No ship can do that." Frank nodded. "No normal ship, no. But the patchwork isn't normal. The combination of Arcturan power and Phyrexian technology creates possibilities that shouldn't exist." Susan thought for a moment. "Do it. Get us to Colony Delta as fast as possible." Frank went to work, rerouting power from various systems into the quantum navigation array. The lights on the bridge dimmed as energy flowed to the experimental jump system. "Ready," Frank announced after a few minutes. "But I should warn you, I have no idea what will happen when we activate this." "Will it explode?" Susan asked simply. Frank considered this. "Probably not." "Then do it." Frank pressed a series of buttons. The ship shuddered. Outside, space seemed to twist and fold. For a moment, everyone on the bridge felt a strange sensation, as if they were in multiple places at once. Then reality snapped back into focus. On the main screen, Colony Delta appeared. The blue-green world was partially obscured by 5 massive Phyrexian ships in orbit. Energy beams from the dreadnoughts were already hitting the colony's main settlement. "We made it," Kathy said in amazement. "That should have taken hours. It only took seconds." "No time to celebrate," Susan said. "Scan those dreadnoughts. Find weaknesses." Lisa worked at her station, analyzing the enemy ships. "Their shields are standard Phyrexian design. Based on our previous encounters, our phase cannon might be effective, but we only have enough power to disable 1 ship at a time." "What about the garbage disposal?" Susan asked. Frank shook his head. "It needs 20 minutes to recharge after the jump." Susan studied the enemy formation. The 5 dreadnoughts were spread out, covering the entire colony. Taking out 1 would still leave 4 to continue the attack. "Captain," Lisa said suddenly, "I'm detecting something strange. The quantum jump did something to our ship's energy signature. We're giving off readings in 3 different locations at once." "What does that mean?" Susan asked. Lisa looked excited. It means their sensors are seeing 3 patchworks, not just one. Susan smiled as a plan formed in her mind. Can we enhance that effect? Make them think there are more of us? Frank thought for a moment. Maybe. If we modulate our shield frequency and adjust the power emissions, we might be able to create even more false signatures. Do it, Susan ordered. And prepare the phase cannon. Target the lead dreadnought. As Frank worked his magic in engineering, the patchwork approached the Saraxian fleet. On the enemy ships, sensors detected not one strange human vessel, but what appeared to be 6 identical ships approaching from different directions. The effect was immediate. 2 of the dreadnoughts broke formation, turning to face these unexpected threats. They're confused, Joe said with a grin. They think we're a fleet. Now, Susan ordered, fire the phase cannon at the lid ship. The blue-white beam lanced out, striking the largest dreadnought. As before, the unusual energy signature bypassed the Saraxian shields, causing systems throughout the ship to fail. On the colony surface, Governor Paul Martinez watched in amazement as one of the dreaded Saraxian ships suddenly went dark. Then he saw what appeared to be multiple human vessels engaging the enemy fleet. Where did they come from? His aide asked in wonder. Martinez smiled as he recognized the strange, asymmetrical design of the ships. That's the scrap heap. The ghost ship built from junk. Looks like the stories were true after all. 1 month after the battle at Colony Delta, Susan Miller stood in the center of the war room at Earth Command Headquarters. Admiral Peterson and the Joint Chiefs of Staff sat around a large table, watching her with expressions that ranged from disbelief to admiration. Let me make sure I understand, Admiral Peterson said. Your ship, which was built from scrap, managed to defeat 5 Saraxian dreadnoughts. Not exactly, sir, Susan replied. We disabled 2 of them. The other 3 retreated when reinforcements arrived. But before the reinforcements got there, your one ship held off a force that should have destroyed you instantly, Peterson pressed. Susan nodded. The patchwork has certain advantages. Frank Dawson stepped forward. May I explain, sir? Peterson nodded. The quantum navigation system, when connected to our modified Arcturine power core, creates a unique effect. Frank said. It generates quantum echoes of our ship. To enemy sensors, it appears that there are multiple patchworks, not just one. You're telling me your ship can duplicate itself? One of the Joint Chiefs asked. Not physically, Lisa Howard clarified. These are energy projections, but they're solid enough to fool sensors and targeting systems. Admiral Peterson leaned forward. And your phase cannon? The reports say it bypasses Saraxian shields completely. The combination of Arcturine focusing crystals with human amplifiers creates an energy signature that Saraxian shields aren't designed to recognize, Lisa explained. By the time their systems identify it as a threat, it's already penetrated their defenses. Peterson looked thoughtful. So your recommendation is that we build more of these patchworks? Susan and Frank exchanged glances. That's just it, sir, Susan said. We can't. What do you mean? Frank took a deep breath. We've tried to replicate the effects. Something about the specific combination of salvaged parts we used, the unique damage patterns in the components, created a quantum signature that can't be duplicated. Our attempts to build a second ship with the same capabilities have failed. So we have exactly one miracle ship, Peterson said with a frown. Yes, sir, Susan confirmed. But the Saraxians don't know that. Peterson's eyes widened as he understood. They think we have a fleet of these vessels. Exactly, Susan smiled. We've intercepted their communications. Their high command believes we've developed a new class of stealth warship that can appear and disappear at will. They're proceeding with extreme caution in all engagements now. Joe spoke up. They're afraid of junk, sir. No, Susan corrected. They're afraid of what humanity can do with junk. They're afraid of our creativity, our ability to take broken pieces and create something new and unexpected. Admiral Peterson stood and walked to the window. Outside, in a special docking bay, the UES Patchwork floated in space. From this distance, it still looked like a collection of mismatched parts. But now the Admiral saw it differently. "Captain Miller," he said finally, "your new orders are simple. You will take your impossible ship back out there, and you will make sure every species in the galaxy understands the message. Humanity takes what others discard and turns it into something miraculous." Susan saluted. "With pleasure, sir." Later, as the crew boarded the Patchwork for their next mission, Joe pulled Susan aside. "Should we tell them about the ship's latest trick?" he asked quietly. "The way it started repairing itself when we're not looking." Susan glanced at a section of hull plating that had been damaged in their last battle. Somehow, the metal had reshaped itself, becoming stronger than before. No one had ordered the repair, and no crew member had done the work. "Let's keep some secrets for ourselves," Susan replied. "After all, I'm not sure I understand it myself." As they stepped onto the bridge, Susan felt the now familiar hum of the ship. The Patchwork was more than just metal and circuitry. The combination of technologies from different worlds, different species, had created something unique, something alive in its own strange way. "Where to, Captain?" Kathy asked from the navigation console. Susan smiled. "Everywhere. Let's show the galaxy what humanity can do with a pile of junk and a little imagination." The Patchwork's engines glowed with an impossible light as the ship moved away from Earth. On scopes across 3 star systems, sensors detected not one ship, but 7 identical vessels moving in perfect formation. The most feared warship in the galaxy was just getting started.